the first one, the collective summaries that's on the slide here, it really is to kind of consolidate all of the change talk that's been said, and we're going to talk about change talk next, but all of the arguments for change that have been articulated that sometimes the client hasn't connected well in their thinking. And with the help of a skillful listener and reflective listener like yourself as a motivational enhancement practitioner, you can do that service for them. They may not have bundled together all these different reasons why change might be a good idea, and they're used to think of them in kind of in little discrete compartments or silos in their own thinking. But as you're talking to them, you're making a note, okay, that was an argument for change, there's an argument for change, there's an argument for change. And at some point, a collective summary would be a strategic choice for the purpose of bundling all the arguments for change together, offering them back to the client in a way that, because they're all strung together, they may connect dots for that person in a way that by themselves, without your help, they may not have connected those dots as strongly, at least. So an example of that, to use my example that I used earlier about the person referred to you for alcohol abuse, they tell you that, it's hurting their bottom line financially. They tell you that it's getting them in trouble with their car insurance. Let's say they also say at whatever point in time that their girlfriend is threatening to leave them unless they, get some help. And at one other point, they wonder if they're losing some self-respect because they blacked out and their friends told them that they did something really embarrassing while they were blacked out that they don't even remember. Okay, so maybe those things came up in parts of a couple of different discussions or counseling sessions. You may at one point decide that for strategic reasons you want to bundle them all together. And so you may say something like, so let me see if I understand correctly. You've said that your involvement with alcohol is really kind of hurting your financial life. It's gotten you into some legal trouble, and it's putting your insurability as a driver at risk. And it seems to be having a harmful impact on your social life with your girlfriend threatening to leave you. And there are times because of that blackout incident that you described that, you're wondering about your own kind of reputation or your self-respect. Do I have that right? And again, you're feeding back things that the person told you. So you're not making anything up, and you're being gentle and respectful and not judgmental about it. But at the same time, when you string those four things together in the same reflective summary, all of a sudden the collective weight of those four things can connect some dots or be a bit of an aha moment for some folks who aren't used to thinking of them all together. They may be used to thinking of them as separate, discrete, siloed, unconnected things, but by virtue of your summary, your collective summary, you've put them all together. And that can be something that can strengthen that person's realization of, gosh, that's a pretty compelling set of evidence that may be motivating that person to be able to move toward committing to change. So that would be an example of a collective summary. A linking summary is one that could be used like to develop discrepancy, for example, right? So to use the example of the mom who, let's say she's smoking crack cocaine, but she really values motherhood and doesn't want her to lose her child. Let's say she's already lost her child to family court, and she has to prove that she's a fit mother in order to get her child back. And so in different conversations, she's told you that she really values motherhood, and she didn't have a present mom, and she knows the negative impact that it had on her, and she really wants to do more and better for her baby. And then at other times, you're exploring her relationship with crack cocaine and the fact that, she's using it increasingly and testing positive for, the court, and that the court is viewing that as evidence of being an unfit mother, and that's why her child was removed from the home. A linking summary might be one that's intended to develop that discrepancy. So gathering those different things that you've been told by that client and feeding them back in a linking summary may be something like, so, I've heard you speak a lot about how much you value motherhood and how important it is for you to be, a present and responsible and caring mom for your child, especially since, you didn't have that growing up and you really recognize how that, hasn't been helpful for you. And then again, the court has removed your child from your custody because, in spite of you really wanting to be a good mom, the court is thinking that, gosh, your involvement with, crack cocaine is not something that they consider to be part of, being a fit parent. What do you make of that? Right? You didn't introduce any new content that didn't come from your client, but what you did do is summarize it. You linked it together in a way that kind of puts the discrepancy in plain view and puts it back in front of your client. And then they got to deal with that, right? That sets up a cognitive dissonance, right? With your help, very gently and respectfully and accurately in a reflective statement sort of way, in a summarization sort of way, all you did was feed back content that came from your client in a manner that's designed to get them to think about how those things are disconnecting, the discrepancy between wanting to be a good mom and my using behavior, okay? You're not judging it, you're not analyzing it, you're just feeding it back. And that can be very activating for the person, because when we realize, cognitive dissonance is not a state that human beings are comfortable with. And cognitive dissonance typically drives us in one of two directions. It either drives us to compromise our values in order to accommodate our behavior, or change our behavior to match up with our values. And obviously in this situation, you're counting on the strength of this person's devotion of being a good mom, that value, as being the motivational factor that's strong enough to motivate her to change her behaviors to meet that value. That's what you'd be cheerleading for, obviously, in a motivational enhancement sort of scenario. And then lastly, there's a transition scenario, a transition summary. And that's really when it's time to turn the page. Maybe you've, evoked as much content as is there to be had at that point in time. You've reflected, affirmed in response to the answers to your open-ended questions. And it's really time to maybe move to another topic or another area of inquiry. And so our transitional summary is one that can kind of wrap up that piece of the conversation and then turn the page to something else. So you basically, summarize kind of a Reader's Digest condensed version of what the person has been talking with you about, and you do it strategically in whatever way to maximize the change talk that you have heard, the argument for change. And then, is there anything else here? No. Okay, well, why don't we turn our focus to boom, whatever else would be an example of a transitional summary. So I like the word picture of a bouquet, right? Let's say all the pieces of change talk or the different discrepant, elements that the person gives you are all flowers. And as the skilled motivational interviewer that you are or are becoming, you're grabbing those flowers as they come from your client and you're putting them together in a bouquet. And when you get enough of them and the time feels right strategically to offer them back, that's what you do. Like in the example of the collective summary, all these flowers are different pieces of argument for change that you bundle together and you present back to your client, like in the form of a bouquet. It's a word picture that's helpful for some folks, so I offer it to you for your consideration. So if you've done your engagement work really well and you've built that therapeutic rapport and you've got the defenses down and the person is feeling validated because you're affirming them, and they're feeling listened to because you're doing the reflective statements, and they understand that you're listening, they get it, or they understand that you get where they're coming from, and they're able to identify what they're really a customer for, what they're internally motivated for, then, but yet they're still ambivalent. Well, that's when the evocation kind of skills come in that are part of motivational interviewing. And that's what used to be called evoking self-motivational statements. I like the phrase change talk instead of self-motivational statements, so we're going to move forward talking about change talk. How do we get change talk, that's part of the argument for change, to come out of our client's mouth rather than coming out of our mouth to an ambivalent person where it's going to be reacted to poorly. Another addition of Miller and Rolnick's third motivational interviewing book reflected a lot of research and additional detail around different kinds of change talk. There had been, a fair amount of research and clarification or expansion of the previous understanding of change talk. In their second edition, they talked about 4 different types of change talk. If your client is saying anything that sounds like finding fault with the status quo being their active using, let's say, with that as the target behavior. If they're saying anything that says, yeah, this isn't so great about, my life right now that's connected with using, that would be a form of change talk. And part of the whole mastery of this as practitioners is training our ears to recognize what comes out of our client's mouth as either the argument for change in some kind of even subtle or indirect way versus the argument against change. And so when we hear the argument for change, even if it's subtle or in the various ways that can come forth, we want to recognize that so that we can reinforce it in the ways that we're going to be talking about coming forward here. But so that was one, problems with the status quo. Another one was, what would be better about if things changed, right? What would be better about using less or finding freedom from using at all? So those are both types of change talk, different types of change talk that were part of their second edition. Another one is the hope or the confidence that change is possible. If you hear somebody expressing hope or confidence that change is possible, that's another form of change talk, according to their second edition of the motivational interviewing material. And then the fourth is some kind of intention to change, some kind of plan, some kind of proposed steps to take in the direction of, in this case, recovery from substance abuse. Those are the 4 kinds of change talk that were put out there as part of the training that was based on Miller and Rolnick's second edition of their motivational interviewing book. But in the third edition, they dug a lot deeper. They drilled down a lot farther in different kinds of change talk.